Welcome to the Microgreens Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Jonah Krochmalnek. Together, we'll explore the art of turning tiny seeds into a thriving microgreens empire, sharing insights, coveted secrets, and strategic wisdom from building one of Canada's largest microgreens farms. Stay tuned for thought-provoking conversations with leading figures in the world of microgreens. Welcome to the podcast, everyone. On today's episode, we have Andy McArdle from Mountain Man Microfarms in Colorado. Andy has been growing microgreens for almost a decade now and has built a very successful large-scale farm selling to 150 restaurants. Andy has built his microgreens farm in a 3,000 square foot greenhouse, and we delve into the pros and cons of growing in a greenhouse versus an indoor facility, scaling his business from one rack to thousands of trays per week, his focus on product quality, and so much more. This is a great episode, and I'm super excited for you guys to tune in. Let's get right into it. Hey, Andy, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to have you on. We've been chatting about making this happen for a while, and I'm really excited to chat with you today. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, happy to be here and glad we could finally connect and talk a little bit about some microgreens.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, like it's funny because you're one of the few farms that was around the time when I started my farm. So I'm so curious to hear about your opinion on things and your perspective. But to start, I'd love to hear how you first got interested in microgreens and farming, and the backstory of how Mountain Man Microfarms came to be.
Yeah, totally. So so I started back in 2015. I was actually, it's not a super long story, but I was getting a master's degree in fisheries biology, and I got all my work to kind of revolve around aquaponics. And with that, I was working on commercial system design and looking for high value crops to grow. And that's when I came across the microgreens. And so I was kind of messing around with them back then. And so can kind of fast forward a couple years. So when I first learned about micros, probably 2013, I was doing the aquaponics for Texas A&M and built them a system and graduated, and I ran that for a year. And then I was offered a job to build aquaponic systems in developing countries with a nonprofit company, and that was in spring of 2015. And I ended up quitting that job with Texas A&M, and I was a wildland firefighter that summer. Just something I always wanted to do. I thought that was a good time to do it. And this job was supposed to start up in the fall of 2015. And when that time came around, I called the guy up, and the job fell through. I still ended up kind of working with them a little bit on the side and worked on some systems in Uganda with the aquaponics. But when it fell through, fire season had ended, and I didn't really have anything to do at the time. And I kind of thought I might go back and do wildland firefighting the following summer. And so I just kind of started growing microgreens in my basement. And I started with one rack. I think it was like $800, one rack, 4 lights, a few bags of seed, and just started to work with one restaurant. And then I got 2 restaurants, and then 3, and then I had 2 racks, 3 racks, 4 racks, and just kind of kept expanding into it in the basement, and started blowing all the electrical fuses and all of that, and had to, I think about that following spring of 2016, that's when I decided, this is it felt like it was building into something, and I decided to just keep on doing it. So I just kept pushing through, and been doing it for almost 10 years now. But after the basement, I expanded into one warehouse. And then I think a year went by. I filled that warehouse up, expanded into a second one that was a little bigger. And I started to, it was all indoor vertical growing. I think I was growing about 12 feet off the ground. I found these different racks. You can get them at Home Depot too. But they got the wood tops to them and or level shelves. And you can actually double stack those. So you're 12 foot off the ground. I don't think you're supposed to, so I don't know if I recommend it, but they stack really well and they connect together really well and it works. And so as one way to expand my footprint in the warehouses. And I was there for a couple years and then just all sorts of issues. I mean, this is a story over, years of the indoor growing, just electrical issues beyond belief, and landlord issues too. Like I was blowing fuses at one point, like every single day, I think at one point towards the end,
wow.
where I was replacing fuses. It kind of started to look like the Chevy Chase Christmas tree. And probably a fire hazard, I'm sure. And the landlord was replacing the roof, and it wasn't just replacing the roof, but he literally ripped the roof off completely. And all while I'm growing underneath it, like it was a nightmare. And I think there was one big storm that came through, and I lost power for, I think it was about 10 days straight. And
wow.
There was no window on this place. And so that's kind of when I decided, I got to move out of that warehouse into a better one and a bigger one, or find another way to grow. And initially, I almost went to a bigger warehouse, and it was going to cost, I think they wanted like $6,000 a month or something. And they wanted I think it was a 2-year minimum lease. And I remember I signed the documents and everything. I just didn't click send in the email. And I was just terrified, being held up to that kind of money and for that amount of time, and not sure what would happen. And because at the time it was still just me doing everything. And so then I decided I'm going to buy land and build a greenhouse where, if the electrical goes out, I still got the sun. Now that's not good in the winter time, of course, for some different reasons for heating and whatnot, but I knew I had the sun. Like I was tired of being in a cave, or it felt like a cave to me at that point. And and so I was looking for land, and then I was going to build a greenhouse, and that's what I ended up doing. And at the end of the day, it was cheaper for me to do that than it was to rent. Per month, my payments are much less than what it would have been to rent that larger warehouse. I built the greenhouse and moved into it January of 2020, and just like everyone else, getting ready for the best summer of our lives, and then COVID hit, and I don't know. I could keep going on and on. It's kind of a crazy situation. I mean, everyone's got their own COVID story at this point. But
yeah,
I remember, you could sense it coming, right before they closed everything. And the day they did it, I went, I think at the time I was working with around 60 or 65 restaurants or so. And it went down to like 2 or 3 in, I think, a 24-hour period. It was just, I was getting text messages, phone calls, emails, everyone's canceling it. all at the same time. And I mean, 2 or 3 restaurants it's hardly, it's just like a hobby at that point, especially when I just
Yeah.
built this greenhouse and everything. And so, yeah, got pretty scary. But just before they closed, because you could just feel all hell was about to break loose, I made this little video, and I posted it, and this was like the day before, I think. Posted it just telling people, how nutritious microgreens were, and that it's not just a garnish. Anybody can eat them. They're good on everything. I'll sell them to anybody. and that video halfway went viral locally, and I think within a week of restaurants closing, at the time I was only doing 1 or 2 deliveries direct to consumer, delivering to their homes every month. And like a week after the closures, after I did the video and word kind of spread around, I think it peaked at around 60 or 70 home deliveries per week. And so that sustained me and kept me afloat kind of that through that whole year. I wasn't making money with it, but I was at least breaking even and able to stay in business. So yeah, and then after that, when restaurants opened up, it's never been better for the most part. So that's kind of the long story of how we got to where we're at today.
For sure. No, it's helpful because there's a lot of interesting things that I want to delve into. One being greenhouse versus growing in a warehouse, because there's obviously benefits and disadvantages to both. But yeah, before we get into that, I'd love to just get a sense of where you're at kind of now. So you have the greenhouse. How large is the greenhouse? How many restaurants? Like, are you only working with restaurants and that still, or mostly restaurants? And then, like, how many trays are you growing a week? Just to give people like a reference for the size of your operation at this point.
Yeah. So this greenhouse is around 3,000 square feet. And then I've got a 1,500 square foot head house on it. And I mostly work with restaurants. I work with around 150 restaurants today.
Wow.
10 or 12 grocery stores and 1 produce distributor. And we still do home deliveries, but I try not to push those. But that's maybe about 10 or so a week now, I'd say, on average. And trays, it's I mean, thousands. I actually don't know the exact number. I haven't actually added up how much we plant, in all honesty. But I do things. I will say I tend to do things the hard way. For the longest time, I feel like I've learned everything the hard way, and I'm sure I'm still doing certain things the hard way. But we deliver Monday, or not Monday. We deliver Tuesday through Friday. We have trucks going out for deliveries all along the Front Range here in Colorado. And with that, we've got 30, 40 different varieties that we're growing. And so, with all the different grow times and all the different delivery days, I want to have the most optimal product going out when it needs to go out. And so I end up planting just pretty much every day of the week. There's something that gets planted. But yeah, that's a little bit of what we're doing.
Yeah, no, for sure. So it sounds like most a majority of the business is still restaurants, but you've diversified into grocery stores and yeah, as well.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of the grocery stores that kind of came just after COVID too. I was kind of lucky because I was in the process of getting like GAP certified and all of that just before COVID. Actually, I might have become GAP. I think I came GAP certified right after restaurants were closed. And then that summer, I got into my first grocery store, and that definitely, yeah, definitely helps diversify a little bit, and get fairly regular orders going out. They don't change too much, which is nice and consistent.
For sure. Yeah, that's my favorite part about grocery stores. Well, like, I'd say also the fact that you're actually like garnishes are great. I think they're still a great thing to consume even in small quantities. But what I really like about grocery stores is the consistency. It just seems like they pay on time. It's easy to work with them once you're in, but getting in is a bit tougher than restaurants. And then the fact from like a health perspective that people are consuming it more as a salad green than as a garnish, which I think there's huge benefits to both. But as someone that's like me personally, just focused on health, it's nice to be able to sell product for that purpose along with the restaurants as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think if I had a choice, like if I just got an influx of even more restaurants to work with and I needed space, the grocery stores, I would be happy to cut them in all honesty, because they
Really?
are, there's certain things that are easy about them and nice, but at the same time, they can be a little bit more difficult too. Especially with, GAP certifications, and there's a lot that goes into that stuff. I mean, a lot of it's common sense, but there's a lot of stuff that just feels unnecessary. Like you almost need, when you get to a certain point with that, like you almost need one person, like that's their full-time job. It's just dealing with your certifications and staying on top of all of that. Because they want a
Wow.
lot. And every single year there's more and more rules, and kind of regulations that they're adding onto it, that you need to follow. Sometimes they're usually not too bad, but it's always, it's just one more thing. Even if it takes 10 seconds, that's one more thing added onto the day. And it just kind of, it adds up. There's already enough that you're doing running these farms, and so much that needs to be done. There's just never enough time in the day.
Yeah, no, totally. Especially when you're selling to that many restaurants and delivering everything with your not yourself, you necessarily, but like your team.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting that's been your experience. I wonder, are you selling more to like larger chains for the grocery stores rather than like independent health food stores?
So there is one kind of local grocery store that I work with, who's definitely the easy one. The other one, I work with Whole Foods, and they're kind of the headache.
Yeah, totally.
Grocery store.
Yeah.
But like you said, once you're
Okay.
Now that I'm in, it's not too terrible, but it definitely is tricky to get in, and which really I got lucky with that. It was just all about meeting the right person at the right time who knew somebody who just so happened to be the guy that is like, he searches out local food for Whole Foods in my region, and
Yeah.
this guy was friends with him, and so he made the connection, and that's the only way. If I didn't have that, I have no idea. I probably wouldn't be in Whole Foods without that.
Yeah, a lot of the time with what I found with the bigger guys, like Whole Foods and the other chains, is a lot of it comes down to timing. So what I found is like, like trying to sell to those places is pretty tough because there's like everyone's in the same boat. They're like, oh my God, if I can sell to Whole Foods, like that's a large number of clamshells or cases or whatever of product we can sell to. So people are very interested in selling to those big players, but they do often come down to timing. So like, I had an opportunity to work with Whole Foods here in Canada. They're not as big as in the US. So there's like, I don't know, 5-6 stores in my general like city. So not as many as there are in the US. But having said that, like they required a listeria swab multiple times a week, refrigerated truck, like all these things that just, if like for me, it was like, do I want to like sell to Whole Foods and have all these requirements, or do I want to go to a bunch of smaller local chains or local grocery stores that don't have those requirements? And for me, I decided to go that direction because I was like, do I really want to have this extra, red tape to deal with? But doesn't mean it's not a good opportunity. It just means that there is going to be more work and more costs associated with working with them. But I can imagine it's probably still pretty lucrative. Obviously, otherwise you wouldn't be working with them. But yeah, I found timing, like sometimes it just comes down to if you have a good product and you're a relatively good salesperson, timing can often be it, or in your case, like just having the right person in your network, which, yeah. So one thing I always recommend to people is like people can get bummed out that they don't get a sale with like, let's say a Whole Foods or something like that. I've seen even with Living Earth that like sometimes a big distributor might be interested, but timing isn't right. So they don't want to carry the product, but then you keep checking in every few months. And then the timing does come at some point that's right. And then you get the sale. So it's not something like it's like you lose once and then it's forever. You're never going to have that customer. Sometimes it can be just checking in every few months with a customer that you really want.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. And I mean, I think there was a lot of timing involved with me getting in as well. Cause I remember at the time, all the Whole Foods in my area, they actually didn't supply any microgreens. They didn't offer them. They had previously, but I guess there was a supplier at some point and it was probably associated with Sprouts. It may not have even been the microgreens, but they had this E. coli outbreak and they took them all out of the stores, out of every single store in the region. And so they didn't have them for quite a while. And they were just getting to the point where they were like, all right, let's try them again. And then I met the guy about the same time. And so timing's definitely a lot. I agree with that. And that goes with restaurants too. I mean, you know, I go to restaurants all the time and, they may not be ready that time, but 6 months down the road, even a year down the road, sometimes I'll get them later on. And it all just, the biggest thing with these farms and growing them, and I think why most people fall out of it, is they're just not persistent enough, or they get discouraged because the far majority of restaurants, at least in my experience, the second you walk in, they're not going to order and put an order in that first meeting. Some do, but the far majority don't. And it takes multiple attempts, multiple meetings. And yeah, just a lot of trying and persistence to get in. So, and that's still hard for me to this day. But that's a big thing.
Yeah, it gets easier. So like, yeah, like for people that may just be starting a farm or considering starting a farm, know that, the first time you go and try to, I remember, the first time I tried to pitch this local distributor, I remember this was even like technically before I started growing microgreens. I had like a small outdoor, I don't know if I would call it a farm, but it was like like part of like this community, and I had a few thousand square feet of land, and I was growing basil, and I was trying to pitch this distributor talking about like the greenhouse emissions. I remember I just spent like the whole time talking about how little greenhouse emissions the basil I'm growing has because I'm growing in the city compared to, and I look back and it's like, that was like, I didn't, I didn't know. I didn't like the focus about the quality, about the price, like, how consistent they can get it. I didn't know what they really wanted. And I wasn't even asking questions. I was just like spewing out this information and just like hoping it would land. And then so when you start out, you don't really know much about sales, about like, the restaurant industry. So the best advice I can give is, instead of, trying to sell something, use that time that you talk to distributors, to restaurants, to direct to consumer customers, to grocery stores. Ask them what they're looking for. Like, try to gather information on what they actually need, instead of assuming that you know what they need. Because if you're new to an industry, you're probably not going to know what people need. So and then once you have the information, you can kind of form a pitch that would somewhat start being more effective, and then you refine it over time. Now, I can imagine that after, being a microgreens grower and farmer for 10 years, I would imagine if you looked back at a video of you trying to get a sale the first time versus how you do it now, I would assume it's probably quite different, and it's probably a lot more effective, even if it's still a difficult part of the challenge of running a business.
Yeah, that's kind of a funny thing I haven't really thought about that, how it's changed, but for me in particular, like, I'm probably one of the biggest introverts you'll ever meet. And with that, there's a lot of social anxiety, and like, going in to a business that I don't know, and I don't know anybody, like, that's like asking me I might as well hold a gun to my head, like, but that's what you have to do, and I had to overcome that, and it's still hard for me to this day. I'll sit in a parking lot of a restaurant, and I've got 150 restaurants behind me, and I'll sit in this new one, and sometimes I'll just turn around and go home and go back next week. But you really just have to walk in the door. And it's funny because I think, I don't know that a lot of my tactics have changed a whole lot. I'm sure they have some, but for the most part, I try to, I always go in with loads of samples and things to show them, to distract them away from me, and try to let the product sell itself, basically. And generally that works pretty well. I will say, I think, like, today it's a lot harder, even though I know I have a lot more experience in the sales side and doing that. I think it's a lot harder to do it today, and make a sale, purely just because back when I first started, there was nobody doing it. And so, like, I was the only local guy. There might have been one or two other small farms kind of growing in the area, but 90% of the restaurants were getting everything from California, and so it made it for very easy sales back then, because it was just absolute day and night. Whereas today, there's definitely more competition with more local growers, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. But when you're working with restaurants, you're all targeting the same ones, your fine dining, high-end restaurants. And so that can make it a little bit harder, because there's just more competition selling them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's definitely more. There's more growers out there now than 10 years ago, but there's also a lot more demand, and a lot more restaurants, and a lot more grocery stores that sell microgreens. So I think every local area is going to be a bit different, right? So, like, when I started out, there was this one massive grower that had a really good quality product, actually. And for me, I had to figure out, like, how do I in the equation of price, service, and quality of product, how do I beat them on that? And it was tough because they obviously figured it out. The recipe that made sense, that was efficient, that was automated. So I used their model as a starting point. So like a lot of people, like if that grower didn't exist, for example, I probably wouldn't have pushed myself so hard to make the product quality as good as it became at Living Earth Farm, because I didn't have anything to worry about. So I see this with a lot of growers that are like very, very focused on just the yield and just like cranking out like a pound off a tray of broccoli, which is like totally doable, but the quality is not going to be there. So if you go to a restaurant with like that kind of quality, like you're making it very hard to sell in that market. Now, obviously, you can sell to grocery stores and like more like price conscious consumers, but in my experience, generally microgreens are like they're a higher priced item, and people want it for either the health benefits or as a garnish. So you want it to look good, which usually looking good means it's a higher quality microgreen. So there's different ways, because like, for example, in your market, if someone's growing a really high quality microgreen, they're probably not going to be able to have a really low price on it. So if you wanted to compete in a different way, you can go to that model of having like a subpar quality product, get really high yields, and then sell it at a much cheaper price. So there's different ways that you can kind of work around competition, which is part of what I do in consulting. And I think that because the market is growing, there's always different avenues. As an example, a lot of people talk about Arrow Farms. They're like this massive farm that sells to Whole Foods, as an example. But most growers are probably not going to target Whole Foods, and Arrow Farms doesn't sell to your like mom and pop local health food store. So like, yes, they exist, but you create your own niche in the market for your product. And then there's also like ways to create new niches. So as an example, I see a lot more farms doing like, freeze dried or greens powders, which have kind of blown up in the last little while and will probably continue to grow. It's hard to say for sure, but it'll probably be a growing market. So while yes, there's more, just as an example, like there's more people making cell phones than there was 20 years ago or 10 years ago, but there's more demand for cell phones. So yes, it's more competitive, but it's also, there's more opportunity. So I think it usually goes hand in hand when a market grows, is that more people want to get into it, which can be a challenge, but can also be an opportunity to carve out your niche in the market.
Yeah, most definitely. No, I definitely agree. And no, I like what you said with you can pack a lot of weight on a tray for certain things, but your quality can go down, and even the way you harvest things. A lot of people will harvest. They'll get things as stemmy as they can, and just for the weight, and that it adds weight, and you got more product to sell, but the quality, I try to tell my guys to harvest things higher up. Like I don't like all the stems. I think like when I put it on a plate, it just looks better when you're just right below the cotyledon leaves, and versus having like a 4-inch stem on a mustard that it starts to look like spaghetti on a plate. At least when you're working with restaurants. And so yeah, I like that. And yeah, there's definitely good ways to keep your quality up and get around some of the competition.
For sure. And I think just like I've seen, pictures on your Instagram, which of your crops and the quality, I can like, I've gotten, I've seen so many microgreens over the years. I can tell just by looking at a picture, like how it'll most likely taste, because the way they grow determines, usually how they taste. And I can tell that you're focused on quality over like just pure yield. And that my guess, which, I don't know this for sure, but I would place a bet on the fact that it's been easier for you to get into up to 150 restaurants because of the quality and not trying to get the maximum yield. So while like there's no right approach or wrong approach. It's just to understand that these are the different options you have. If you focus on quality, your product's gonna be a lot easier to sell. So you don't have to necessarily learn like in-depth crazy sales skills to try to get a sale, because the product is good. So like it's like if I go to a grocery store and I buy something with fancy packaging, but it doesn't taste good, I'm not going to buy it again, and most people won't buy it again. But if it tastes good, the quality is good, you're going to keep repeat buying it. So you don't have to spend as much time necessarily on sales, because people are going to go back, especially with a food product, and buy it again and again. So that's my logic in why I chose to go for a quality product, because then like you can spend more time on actually production and farming rather than sales. Because if you don't have a high quality product, you're gonna have more turnaround and more or turnover of customers, and you have to go out and do more sales to make up for those customers that leave because of quality.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, the key things are, with restaurants anyway, it's quality and consistency. And if you can keep both of those up and be able to make that promise that you're going to bring this every week or every other week or whatever they want, and you never miss a day and the quality stays up, I mean, some chefs will be with you for, forever. I mean, I think there's quite a few restaurants that I've had since the very beginning. My very first restaurant I ever walked into, I didn't even have like a true LLC formed or anything, and he needed he wanted a W-9 and this and that for their accounting, their records, and I didn't have that for the business, and so that night I had to make one and email it to him the same day I created it. And I've been with that guy for almost 10 years now, and so he's gotten a delivery every single week for 10 years straight. So keeping the consistency and the quality, I mean, that's really all you got to do. It's that easy.
Yeah. It gets more complex. Unfortunately, I'm sure we both experienced that once you have employees, and then and the one thing that I'm curious to hear about, which relates to consistency and quality, is growing in a greenhouse versus growing in a warehouse. So generally speaking, a greenhouse is you save on electricity, and they don't have to be in like a expensive, like warehouse space is not cheap to rent necessarily. But I'm curious on like the biggest challenge I've seen, which pushed me to go towards the warehouse, I'm in definitely a colder climate in Canada than you are, but Colorado's, a lot of places are still, the days are pretty short in the winter, and it varies. Like you have 4 distinct seasons there. So I'm curious on why you chose that, and maybe how that plays into the consistency in the product throughout the year.
Yeah. I mean, like when I transferred from growing in warehouses under lights to the greenhouse, it was kind of cool because I didn't the business never shut down. Like it's never shut down in the last 10 years for even a week. It's ran every day. And so during that, when I transferred, it was insane. I still don't know how we managed to do that, but we moved all the crops over in one single day and got them growing, and so within that week, when it was transferring from the grow lights to the sunlight, like and I know I probably didn't have the best grow lights or anything, and so I'm sure like people can grow really good stuff under lights and in warehouses, but what I was growing in the warehouse compared to a week later in the greenhouse and to where it is now, it was like night and day. Like just getting the perfect light to the crops. I was getting more vibrant colors. I mean, thicker, healthier stems. I mean, it was like an entirely new product. And so I definitely really like the greenhouse growing. And could be I'm just not good at the whole indoor vertical growing, but in my experience, I get a much better product in the greenhouse. And yeah, it was really cool to see just duller colors under my lights in the warehouse to just nice, bright, vibrant, more broad leaves and just a healthier plant. And that helps with flavor and shelf life and everything. So, yeah, I would never go back. I would continue to do greenhouses till the day I die.
Totally. I think one thing that's, yeah, like if you're using subpar quality lights, then the sun is going to be stronger than those lights. So it's going to be, it can be quite a big difference between the two. But the way I figured out how to do it, it's pretty similar. Like I even had that large scale grower that that I was telling that had really good quality. They actually came to our farm and they were very impressed on how much the lighting has improved for vertical farms. So like you at this point you can't, like if you do it well, which again is, it's not like you can't just buy any light and just hang them up and expect those results, but it's very doable to have the same and if not better quality with indoor lighting, because you can make it like you can make it stronger, not stronger than the sun, but you can give more daylight hours than you can get. So in the winter where you are, I'm guessing you probably have about 9 hours, maybe 9.5 of daylight in the winter versus the summer where you have like 14.5 or 15. So one of the reasons I generally recommend indoor is because it's a lot easier to get the consistency. So I'm curious, on from the winter to the summer, do you have like supplemental lighting, or do you, like, how do you find that like the difference in days to maturity and quality between the summer and the winter?
Yeah, no, definitely. That is one thing. Like you have to have some supplemental lighting in the winter, to extend the daylight. For the very reasons you're saying, you will get the quality will go down if you don't have more supplemental lighting. And I kind of tested that the first winter, and you can tell, they want their light, and so I do have some,
Yeah.
I do have some grow lights in there that I'll use to extend the daylight for a few months in the winter. We're finally kind of getting past that right now. We're getting enough sunlight to kind of make it
Yeah.
through, so I've got them off at this point. But yeah, that is one thing. So I mean, greenhouses, like at least mine, summertime they're much more inexpensive for the most part to operate. You're not using any supplemental lighting, and you don't have the heating cost and that you have in the winter. You know, you've got to have gas heaters, or for me, there is no gas line anywhere, so I've got to use propane. And so I heat the greenhouse with propane, and does a pretty good job. But at the same time, I mean, you can only climate control a greenhouse so much. Like there's still, temperatures still are going to fluctuate a little bit season to season, and so with that, crops are going to grow a little bit slower in the winter, and so you might get more of a backlog because now things are taking longer to grow. So that's definitely a benefit to warehouse spaces where you can keep that more consistent year round, and not see that change in growing behavior season to season. But once you figure that out, and you just gotta know when to adjust, your planting schedule, and to keep everything on track, and in line with the time.
Totally. Yeah, I think yeah, like the cost of running a greenhouse, like forget about like the capital cost of setting up, but the actual operating cost year round generally for most places is going to be cheaper to grow in a greenhouse than in an indoor space, because you have to pay for AC and heat and rent, which is going to be more expensive, and way more electricity. That's probably potentially the biggest difference, is like how much electricity you need to grow in a greenhouse versus growing indoors. And then one of the other benefits of a greenhouse is you get to be in a greenhouse, which is like probably one of my favorite environments in the winter to be in. It's like, especially this time of year, February, March, when it's the sun's starting to get, you're starting to get longer days, and it starts like really warming up during the day in a greenhouse. It's probably one of my favorite environments to be in. Whereas when you're in a warehouse, whether it's nice out or not, like you have to do the work indoors. So in the middle of the summer, you're still indoors working in the warehouse space. Whereas in a greenhouse, you're in natural light, you're in the sun. And yeah, it just seems, until it gets too hot, it's a better environment in a lot of ways to like actually work in.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think, at least with how I built this business, before I was able to get to the point to hire people, I mean, I was working just insane hours, and that on top of being inside of a warehouse that's darker, and I think, I don't know that I would still be doing this today if I didn't move into the greenhouse. Um, and because it is such a more pleasant environment, definitely helps um, with the whole burnout issues a little bit. Um, for sure. It's hard to beat the greenhouse environment.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like I still like, I before I started my farm, there was the place where there was that land. They also had a greenhouse there, and I remember how absolute, like how good it was to go in the morning on a sunny day with all these microgreens growing and the vibrant colors, and it's just it's a very different experience than a vertical farm. Having said that, on like the coldest days, like coldest dark days in the winter, a vertical farm is a pretty damn good place to be, because it's just, you're surrounded by plants. It's literally like nothing's growing outside. It's a lot of places, at least where I live, it gets quite cold in the winter. So there's nowhere else I'd rather be on a cold, cloudy day. So it was like a internal struggle I had. But at the end of the day, the reason I decided to stick with the vertical farm was, one, the consistency, and two, just the accessibility. If you live in a big city, it's like, it's not really possible until you go like multiple hours away, at least an hour and a half from like where I live, to be able to even find land. And then like, if you're going to build a greenhouse, because it's practically, as far as I can tell, it's really hard to find a greenhouse to rent anywhere near a city. So you'd have to potentially build one. So that it just became logistically not really practical. So it depends on where you are. There might be places, if you're in a smaller town, that there might be an unused greenhouse, or like a company wants to rent out part of their greenhouse. That's a great, easy way to get started on that path. But it does take, it's like a different approach and a different path to take with vertical farming versus greenhouse. And it just depends on what's available, what's possible, and also your climate. Like if you live in Southern California, it's like it would be like, you have a pretty ideal climate, right? So you can grow in a greenhouse year round. But again, if you're in like LA or San Francisco, is it going to be practical to find a greenhouse near you to actually grow in, versus like you can grow microgreens in your house pretty easily? So there's kind of different benefits and challenges depending on where you're located.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And like, yeah, for me, I mean, I'm 45 minutes from Denver, 45 minutes from Colorado Springs. So it's definitely a little bit more of a drive. Whereas when I was in the warehouses, I was, 5 minutes from downtown Denver. But yeah, so it's kind of a give and take thing for sure, and
Yeah,
trying to make it work. Um, yeah, I definitely want to
for
be
sure.
further away than I am. It's about as far as I think I'd want to be.
Yeah, yeah, and again, there's certain places where it's like where it's more practical to get land based on cost, or build a greenhouse based on cost, because like, if you're near a big metropolitan city, land's going to be more expensive, so to build a greenhouse is going to be take more time to pay for itself. The great news though is microgreens are one of the most profitable, if not in my opinion, the most profitable legal crop you can grow. So given that, like, it's going to have a faster payback period than growing lettuce or basil, or other longer term crops, strawberries or tomatoes, where some big large scale greenhouses that grow tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, sometimes it takes like 20 years for them to pay off just the like initial cost and start actually making a profit, which is kind of crazy to think about from a microgreens perspective, because like it's not practical for people to get into it. Like, who's gonna wait 20 years to get a return? Like, it becomes an institutional investor that pays, like, that invests in these things, not an average person like me and you that just want to start growing food and start providing like good quality food for our community. So it makes it a lot more accessible, as well. But you guys are growing a lot of product. So one thing I'm curious on is, how do you manage, like, how many people do you have working, and how do you manage all that production? Because I can imagine that's a pretty big undertaking, uh, from an outside perspective, to to manage all that.
Um, yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely a major logistical um, nightmare that uh, somehow I've kind of figured out a way to dance around it all and make it work fairly smoothly. Um, but I've got 5 people that work for me at this point, and um, yeah, and they're really good at what they do. That's part of it. Like, if you don't have a good team um, that enjoys the work and is passionate about it, and and wanting to help you expand and grow the best product, then it's going to be really difficult. But uh, you know, even at this point, like, there's 2 days a week that I still, like, I'll start at 2 a.m. Um, on Tuesdays and on Thursdays, and I'll go all day till 5 or 6 o'clock. Um,
Wow.
even still, but uh, I think I've just done it so long that it just is I am what I am. Like, this is what I do, and I'm used to it. So it really doesn't bother me doing it. Now, I used to wake up at 2 a.m. every single day of the week, um, and that was the only way I I managed to be able to scale the farm, um, and have the farm build itself and pay for itself, by not hiring people. Like, I could have hired people a lot sooner than I did, but I needed that money to help build the farm and expand the farm, and so I had to do triple the work to do that. Um, and now that I've gotten it to where it is now I can let off a little bit, um, and get the help that we need, so that I don't completely kill myself. Um, but there's lots of spreadsheets, and I try with restaurants. I mean, you really need to get standing orders. Like, that's pretty
Yeah.
critical. You want a standing order where they put an order for the same thing every single week. I always tell them, like, you can change it at any time. I'm not gonna, like, I don't have any weird, like I don't do any contracts or any fee, like, charge them anything if they don't take something that they normally take this week and they want to change it. As long as they stay with me, that's all I care about. But I want that standing order, even if it fluctuates periodically with the menus. As long as you got the standing order, then you generally know what to grow. You can grow it on time and get it to them each week, and that helps you set your schedule, so you know what you need to plant, every day of the week or however many days you're planting, and what to harvest when. And so it's generally the same thing every day of the week. There's the same tasks that need to get done. But I will say with that, I've gotten to a point where there's more and more customers will come to me and they're kind of, and I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like they're more, ever since COVID, more chefs are afraid of that standing order, and a little more hesitant with it. And so I found that more and more I've got quite a few customers that, I'll message them every single week asking them, what do you want this week? What do you want this week? What do you want this week? And it'll fluctuate. Sometimes it's completely different. Sometimes it's fairly similar. And that's just taken a lot of practice to figure out, to kind of know what to grow and have the right quantities to be able to meet orders that you don't even necessarily know are coming yet. Which gets tricky. That's just kind of coming from experience, I guess. And not overplanting to where you're throwing out too much and having too much waste, or underplanting and having to short people. But I definitely wouldn't recommend that for your new grower. Like, you want that standing order. Like, you've got to have it. And that's what's gonna help you build and get that regular income and reoccurring payments with your customers, to keep building it. But yeah, and also, I can have certain surpluses because I have different kinds of customers, from like a home delivery and a grocery store and a produce distributor and then the restaurants. If I have surplus of something, I can let different people know, or I'll send out a mass email saying, I've got, all these extra pea shoots or cilantro or whatever, and offer it at a little discount maybe to try to get people on it, which usually works pretty well. But the other thing you can do with my home deliveries, at least at the moment, they kind of get a random assortment of microgreens when they order. So I don't let them pick what they get yet. There are two options, which can be two different types of mixes, but they don't pick exactly what they want. And so that way, some of my surplus will end up going to them, instead of getting tossed if I have it. And then for harvested mixes, I've got one called a farmer's mix. And, it's generally the same thing, but I can throw in different things. There's certain things you don't want to put into a mix that'll just throw it off, different herbs and things. But there's a lot of things you can mix in there that work well with the mix, and no one will even know that it changes. But they all know that it, it's kind of like it's the farmer's mix. It changes. It can change week to week as to what we have. And so that kind of helps with some surplus that we might be growing for these other orders that we're trying to anticipate. So
For sure.
yeah,
no, like that's a smart way to kind of utilize extra. And you see this even with like the big farms in California with their like salad mixes. They'll have a list of like 10 different ingredients on it, but it doesn't always have all of them. and it may have different proportions of it depending on what's available. So it's a really smart way to utilize everything you have as much as you can. Like you said, like you're probably not going to want to put cilantro in a mix, because that's it's like, at least the like something that's meant for a salad as an example. Like there could be something that cilantro would, like a taco mix or something like that, but for just a general kind of mix, you probably wouldn't want to put something really strong flavored like that. That's a herb. But yeah, I think it's a good point with the standing order, that it's really important when you start out to establish that, and then as you get bigger and bigger. I had the same experience where we started with a standing order, and then if there was a customer here and there that we really wanted to take on that wouldn't take on a standing order, we would still potentially work with them. But at the beginning, or even like honestly the first several years, I would just turn down customers. Like people might be like that could be a potential sale. Yes, but like at what expense? Like how do you want to run your business? And for everyone, it's different. For me, I want to keep it simple, so it's easy for me and the staff that are working at the farm to know what needs to be done. We had this one very large distributor that would have been a ton of revenue, but they wanted us with 24 hours notice to like package stuff and get it delivered, and like 5 days a week. And it just wasn't practical for us to run a business that way. It would have been very chaotic. And for me personally, again, when you run your own business, you have the choice in how you run it. I didn't want that kind of chaos in my life, where like you're getting an order, you're calling the staff, they're like in the middle of doing something. Oh, you got to pack like 20 clamshells of this. They're going to come pick it up in 2 hours or whatever. Like it can get quite chaotic. But as you get bigger, and you have a big enough base, it's easier to take on a customer that won't operate with the standing order. And on the other side, there's ways to pitch the standing order that make it more effective than just being like, hey, we need a standing order. If you don't want one, we can't work with you. You can make it as clear as possible that like, look, like the standing order just allows us to make sure we can produce enough so that we have product for you. And then at any time you can change the standing order. So we had a very similar approach where it takes the pressure off the customer, where like, and it's really a way for you as the farmer to be able to predict how much you need to grow. Because if it's like, hey, this week we want 100 clamshells, next week 10, and then 5, and then 200, like it's pretty much impossible to plan production, unless they're willing to forecast for you like every week and commit to that order, which at that point they might as well just do a standing order. So I'm totally on the same page where a standing order is really important when you start, but you can kind of ease off the pedal on ensuring you have it for specific customers as you scale. If everyone had that, it again becomes a more challenging thing to manage, but you can kind of have a few customers here and there, because with scale, there's always going to be fluctuations in some orders, and then for the most part it'll balance itself out if you have like not a huge number of customers, but some that are not on a standing order.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I've had the same thing. There's certain distributors that they'll just call you up out of the blue. They're like, yeah, I'll take 100 cases of cilantro, and that's definitely not going to happen. And yeah, that'd be impossible. You'd be throwing out hundreds of pounds every week if you just let them come at you like that. Or you'd never make a sale, really.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a balancing act, and it's important to understand, because there's a lot of people that just want to say yes to everything, especially when you're new, and it can be great because you can get a lot of sales really fast potentially, but it can be very difficult to manage as you scale. So what I try to teach is like, make a business that is scalable for you, and that's going to be different for everyone. Some people are totally fine with having every customer needing all these different unique things. But the more scalable you can make it, the easier it becomes on you as a business owner to actually scale it and prevent burnout, which in my opinion is the biggest reason that, farms fail. And I think, to your point, sales can be one as well, where if you kind of don't have the patience to like kind of wait sometimes to get some sales and be persistent, that could be another big reason that that farms end up closing shop. It's what I've seen is it's very rare that it's actually like a profitability issue for microgreens farms. It's like it's very, very rare that I see that being the issue why farms don't exist. Whereas you see like lettuce farms or other type of like big vertical farms, they're almost always failing because of financial reasons. Whereas microgreens farms, it's generally not financial. It's more building the business in a sustainable way that actually works long term for you as the business owner, the staff. Yeah, so it's kind of funny how microgreens farms, it's not a financial issue. It's just how do you build a business so that it's successful rather than a money issue.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's all, like we were talking, it's all logistics and scaling. It gets complicated.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it can get very complicated, especially at scale, which is important to have a plan in place. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear. This is a question I ask all farmers, just because I find it so fascinating to hear the differences between what people think. But if you like in your current state of running the farm, if you could just wave a magic wand and just instantly solve a business challenge that you have, what specific issue would you want to resolve and why?
That is a good one, man. I mean, I don't know. I'd probably try to figure out how to make sales easier. But that's just because that's not my personality. Like I'm not the biggest talker in the room, and so sales has just always been the hardest for me, for sure. And that's what I would try to figure out. Definitely try to make sales easier, one way or the other. But it's
I'm
tricky
curious
because it's
on.
all. Oh no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I wonder like whenever there's something I don't really like in a business, if I can, I prefer to outsource it to someone else that does enjoy it. If it's something I really want to learn, that's different. I'm curious if you ever considered like having like some sort of salesperson to do that role for you, and then just teach them like what are the best selling points and just have someone else kind of do that for you.
Well, that's what's really weird about it for me is it's a love-hate thing, because as hard as it is for me, I think that's also what makes it one of the things that I enjoy doing, because it's kind of like a game. Like it's like, can I actually pick up this customer, and how do I convince them to work with me, and 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 how do I keep them happy? Um, it's so it is kind of a weird thing. I do have um, a delivery guy that Pete. He's really good. He delivers the majority of what we send out every week, and um, periodically um, we'll send him into some different restaurants to help us kind of to pick some up. But for the most part, you know, I've kept most of that on my end, and it's a weird thing. Like I don't want to do it. I don't like doing it, but at the same time, I do. Even though that makes no sense at all. It's kind of just the challenge of it. Like that for me, like that is the challenge, and that keeps things more interesting, I guess. Um,
For sure.
growing and doing the actual farming and the work in the greenhouse, like there's a lot of fun in that too, and a lot of challenge. Like we're still, like I still tell everybody, like we're like you're never perfect, like you never know everything. We're always improving and trying to improve on efficiency and quality. Like there's always another notch up. Like you can always do something better. And so we're always trying to get better and at different things. And So it's, yeah, I don't know. It's
No, totally. It makes sense
yeah,
because, like, when you do something for a long period of like time like that, at least my experience is like you kind of learn the ins and outs of the business. So kind of moving towards things that may still be challenging, it keeps things interesting, right? Like it's that, like, if everything's just easy, it becomes very mundane after a while. Now I would imagine, like, running at scale, there's always some sort of challenge, but if it's something that's there's still a difficulty with it, it makes it more appealing to want to do it because it's like a personal growth thing. At times, even though even though you've been doing it for a while, there's still can be things that are difficult in running a business, and there's always new challenges that pop up. But it totally makes sense. Like, yeah, so I get it from your perspective. So yeah, it makes sense.
yeah. Well, and with that, like doing it for so long, like, I've grown every microgreen I can think of, and so now, like, I'm trying to, like, I just built a high tunnel, and we're gonna move into other crops, and so that'll help kind of, get the brain kind of thinking again and learning new things, and growing tomatoes and cucumbers and root vegetables, and kind of expanding on the farm in that direction. Not only to expand the farm, but also just to kind of keep us all interested and just keep us learning and doing new things.
For sure. I totally agree. Like, I think it's always fun to start experimenting with different things. Like, I experiment with lettuce. Edible flowers wasn't really a thing until more recently for microgreens farms. But yeah, there's so many cool, unique crops besides the microgreens that you can grow. It's just a matter of, like, is it make sense financially to grow, and is it something that can actually grow? Like, I think it would be so cool to, like, grow wasabi or some unique crop, but is it really doable in your climate, and is it going to be profitable, all this stuff? But I think there's so many unique crops, and there's always new things like that become the new hot trend in the market. And, like, I remember when I started farming, kale was like the most popular thing in the entire world at the time, and now it's just like, oh, it's kale, like everyone knows it, and it's nothing
Right.
special anymore. And then there's the new thing that pops up, and so yeah, it helps keep things interesting. And yeah, just always growing new things is you could tell you're a farmer when you always want to try new things, even though you have a business that works and is making money. You still want to try new things just because it keeps things exciting.
Yeah. No, exactly. Um, yeah, I would say that's all the
Awesome.
truth.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. If listeners want to connect more with you or learn more about you and your farm, where can they find you online and on social media?
Um, yeah, it's on Instagram. That's the main place, but also on Facebook. Um, and yeah, feel free to shoot me a message if you got any questions on either platform. You should be able to find me, Mountain Man Micro Farms. Um, and yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I'll put in the show notes for sure. But thanks so much for coming on, Andy. This was a great episode, and yeah, it was really great to hear your perspective on your 10-year journey of growing microgreens from the start to where you're at now.
yeah. No, it was great talking to you, and yeah, happy growing.
Thanks for tuning in to the Microgreens Mastery Podcast. To access a wealth of insights, just click the subscribe button, stay notified about each new episode, and enjoy all of this wisdom for free. If you're ready to supercharge your microgreens business, visit microgreensconsulting.com for a gold mine of guides and resources. We've transformed thousands of microgreens businesses, and you're invited to join the success story. Let's stay connected. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Microgreens Consulting for exclusive content and expert tips and wisdom. If you found this episode insightful, please leave us a review, spread the word, and let's share microgreens magic with the world. Until next time, let curiosity fuel your growth, and may happiness be your harvest. Happy growing, everyone.